They wrote us off. That is the part I want you to understand before anything else, because everything that came after only makes sense if you start from there. To the Titans, we were not a fleet, not a threat, not even an enemy. We were a stain, a system that had died on schedule and forgotten to stop drifting. They had a word for it in their tongue, a click and a low note I could never make with a human throat, and the closest our translators ever rendered it was leavings. That is what we were to them. The leavings of something that used to matter. I was 19 the year they took my brother. I am a great deal older now, and I have told this badly more times than I can count, in mess halls and in bars, and once to a board of inquiry that did not believe a word of it. So I will try to tell it straight, the way Jack would have wanted, because he hated decoration on a true thing. You have to know about the wasting first. It came before my memory has any teeth in it. I was small. What I have is second-hand, stitched together from the people who lived through it and did not last long after. The wasting was a sickness, and it was not ours. It came down on the colonies of the Reach the way weather comes down, indifferent and total, and it had one mercy in it and one cruelty, and they were the same thing. It only killed the grown. Anyone who had finished their growing, anyone whose bones had set and whose voice had dropped and whose hands had learned a trade, the wasting took them. It left the children. It left the half-grown. It left 100,000 of us across a dozen orbital stations and 3 planets, and a fleet of warships with no one left tall enough to reach the high consoles. Our parents died at their posts. The captains died in their chairs. The engineers died with their hands inside the drive cores they had spent 40 years learning. My mother was a fire control officer on a heavy cruiser. My father ran cargo between the inner docks. I remember neither of them well enough to grieve them as people. I grieved them as a shape, a missing weight, the way you favor a leg that healed wrong. And here is the thing about the wasting that I did not understand until much later, the thing that matters. It was not weather. Weather is no one's fault. The wasting was sent. The Titans made it. They cooked it in whatever passes for a laboratory among a people who think of medicine as a weapon and of weapons as art, and they seeded it into our air and our water and let it do its slow work. And then they sat at the edge of the system and waited for the adults to die. They had run the arithmetic. Children cannot crew a fleet. Children cannot hold a line. Children cannot, the arithmetic said, do anything but starve in the dark of the stations their parents built. So the Titans waited a season, and then they came in and took what they wanted, and they were not wrong about much. They were only wrong about one thing, and it took them years to learn it. And by the time they learned it, I had blood on me that has never entirely washed off. We crewed the ships, of course we did. What else were we going to do? I'm not telling you it was clean or fast or that we knew what we were doing. We did not. The first years were a horror I will not lay out for you here because it has nothing to do with this story, and because some of it I still cannot say out loud. Children froze. Children suffocated when the air plants failed and no one knew how to bleed the lines. Children fought each other over the canned protein in the station holds, and some of those fights ended the way fights end. But the ones who lived learned. We had to. The ships were there. The manuals were there. Our dead had left 100 years of knowing written into the bones of every vessel. And we were stubborn, and we were frightened, and we had nothing else. And so we taught ourselves to fly the things our parents had died inside of. We learned by failing mostly, and we paid for the lessons in the only currency we had. I learned navigation off a dead woman's notes, a fire control officer I never met, her hand marks still in the margins of the manuals, little reminders to herself that I followed like a stranger's footprints across a frozen lake. I learned the railgun by nearly losing a hand to it. Fish learned the drive by killing one, a station reactor that he was a hair too slow on, the first time, and 4 of his crew with it, and he never spoke of it, but he never afterward let anyone else be the last one out of the core either. That is how all of us learned everything that we knew. We learned it the way you learn the edge of a knife. And the thing that came out of it, the thing that the Titans never reckoned with, was a generation that had been raised by nobody, taught by the dead, and forged in a cold that should have killed every soft thing in us, and had not. It had done the opposite. People who have nothing learn very fast and very deep that the only thing standing between them and the dark is each other. We did not become hard. The Titans assumed we would become hard, or stay soft and die. We became something they had no category for. We became loyal past all sense to each other, because loyalty was the only wealth the wasting had left us, and we hoarded it like the air it nearly was. By the time I am telling you about, the system had sorted itself into two kinds of people. That is too clean a way to put it, but it will do. On one side were the holdouts, the scavengers, the ones who kept the old human ships alive on salvage and spite and refused to bow to the occupation. We ran out of the deep stations and the cold rocks at the edge of the belt, and we lived hand to mouth, and we shared what we had because there was no other way to live. Jack used to say it different. Jack used to say nobody gets left in the dark. That was the whole of his politics. Nobody gets left in the dark. And on the other side were the ones who had decided the Titans were the future and meant to be standing close to it when it arrived. They crewed for the occupation. They ran the supply lines the Titans wanted run. They wore the plating the Titans gave them as a mark of favor, polished it, walked taller in it, and they held the inner docks under Titan license and called it order. We called them the West Siders, after the old inner districts they'd seized, and the Titans let them play at being lords, because lords are useful and cheap to a power that does not intend to share anything that matters. The Titans themselves held the West Reach. You could see it on a long lens on a clear night, a captured human deep dock the size of a small moon, all our old yellow work lights gone out and replaced with the cold blue the Titans favored, and bristling now with their own additions, their own ships nested in our old slips like wasps in an abandoned skull. That was where their commander sat, the eldest of them, the one our translators rendered, with no irony any of us could detect, as the warden. He had a name in their tongue too, and the West Siders learned to say it, but I only ever heard humans call him by what he was, the warden of the West Reach, the one who had run the arithmetic on the wasting and signed it. I crewed the Bluff. She was a heavy cruiser, human-built, the same line my mother had served on, and I would like to tell you she was a proud ship, but the truth is she was a wreck that refused to admit it. 3/4 of her armor was salvage, mismatched plating welded over the wounds, no two panels the same alloy, so that in the light she looked like a thing assembled out of the corpses of her own sisters, which is exactly what she was. Her port engine ran 0.5% hot and always had, and we had stopped trying to fix it and started trusting it. Her main gun was a spinal railgun that took 90 seconds to charge and would put a slug through anything in the system if you could only keep it pointed long enough, which you almost never could. We named her the Bluff because that is what she was. We had nothing. We were holding nothing. And we ran her at the occupation like we had 4 more behind her, because the day they stopped believing the Bluff was the day we died. Jack captained her, not because anyone made him, because when there was a hard thing to do, Jack was already moving toward it before the rest of us had finished being afraid, and people follow that. They cannot help it. I followed it my whole life, and I was his sister and knew better. There were maybe 60 of us aboard, which is a skeleton crew for a ship her size, and most of us were younger than the consoles we ran. I worked guns and navigation, which on the Bluff were the same station because we did not have the bodies to split them. Scratch worked boarding and breach and anything that needed doing with a cutting torch and no patience. Sunshine ran the air plant and had kept 60 of us breathing for 3 years on a system rated for 200 adults, and never once let us forget it. Fish ran the drive with a crew of 4 and a prayer. And there were the rest, all of them faces I could draw in the dark, and most of them gone now. And I will not list a roll of the dead in the second page of a story, or you will stop reading, and I would not blame you. I have to tell you about Scratch separately because she is the one who carried me through what came, And because if I do not tell you what she was, you will not understand why any of us did what we did. Scratch and I had been together since the cold years, since before the ships, since the station holds when we were small and rationing protein, and learning what people will do when there is not enough. She was not blood. In the world I grew up in, blood was the least of the ways you could belong to someone. She was the one who came back for me in the dark when I was 9 and a fire had taken the section we slept in and the older kids were already counting me as lost, and she dragged me out by the collar with her own air running low, and she never once mentioned it again, and I never once forgot it. We had been each other's since then. The Titans, when they finally tried to understand us, never found a word for it, because their language does not contain the idea. They have words for rank and words for debt and words for the moltenkin you are hatched alongside, but they have no word for two people who simply decided, without anyone's leave, that they would not be apart. That gap in their tongue is the whole reason I am alive to tell you this. Hold on to that. It comes back. The night they took Jack, we were running a supply line. It was the same kind of work we always did. The West Siders ran convoys for the Titans, ore and worked metal and the strange cold cargoes the Titans needed and would not say what for, and we hit those convoys when we could, because the cargo kept our stations breathing, and because every ton we took was a ton the occupation did not get. It was not heroic. It was groceries. We were stealing groceries with a warship. The convoy that night ran heavier escort than the take seemed to warrant, and Jack saw it, and Jack called it off, and we were already pulling away clean when the medical cargo came up on the manifest crawl. Cold storage medical. Plant cultures, the kind you could grow air scrubbers from, the kind that could double Sunshine's margin and let us take in another 40 mouths from the cold rocks who were dying for one of exactly that. Jack looked at me across the bridge. I knew the look. Nobody gets left in the dark. He took a boarding team across himself, which he should not have done, which he never should have done, and which he did anyway because he never asked a hand to walk into a place he would not walk first. I had the bluff in the dark 1,000 meters off the convoy's flank, drives flushed, the railgun cold and ready, and I watched the boarding lights cross the gap on my own screens, 6 little points of human warmth crossing to a hull full of cold cargo and worse. Scratch went with him. She always went where Jack went when there was a breach to cut, and I always hated it, and I never once said so out loud because saying it would not have changed it and would only have let her know it cost me. The take went well. That is the part that makes it unbearable. The take went perfectly. I listened to it over the team channel, Jack's voice flat and easy the way it got when the work was dangerous, Scratch swearing at a frozen lock seal, the dull clang of the cultures coming aboard one cold storage drum at a time. 6 minutes. We had done it 100 times. They had the cultures aboard and were pulling the team home, and on my screens the 6 little points of warmth were crossing back toward the bluff, and I had already begun to let the breath out of my chest. Then the escort that should not have been there folded out of a transit shadow. I have gone back over the convoy manifest 1,000 times in my head, and the escort was never on it. The Titans had laid it the way you lay a trap, a heavy hull running dark in a fold of the gravity well, waiting on exactly the kind of raid we ran because they had finally bothered to learn that we ran them. It came up out of nothing with a tractor lance already charged, and it put the lance through the boarding shuttle while the team was still crossing, and the shuttle slewed and lost its line, and in the 30 seconds we had to choose, Jack made the choice. He put his half of the team out the shuttle lock and into our recovery net, 4 of them, Scratch among them, kicked out into the dark for us to scoop up, and he stayed aboard the failing shuttle himself with the cultures and a sidearm to hold the breach against the boarders coming up the lance, and to keep the escort's gunners busy on him instead of on the 4 bodies drifting toward our net. He bought them 30 seconds with his own hull. The lance took the shuttle, drives and all, hauling it into the dark toward the waiting escort, and they had him. I had the guns, I want to be honest with you. I had the railgun charged and the firing solution on the escort in my hand on the commit, and I did not fire, because the shuttle was inside the kill cone and Jack was on the shuttle. And I have spent more nights than I will admit going back to that 30 seconds and asking whether a faster, harder woman would have fired anyway and trusted the arithmetic. I think the answer is that a faster, harder woman would not have been worth saving. But it does not help on the nights. They took my brother to the West Reach. They sent us the manifest of it, which is a thing the Titans did, a thing I did not understand until later. They did not gloat. The warden did not believe in gloating any more than he believed in mercy. He simply logged the capture and transmitted the log on an open channel the way you would file a customs entry, because to him, my brother was cargo that had changed hands, and the recipient of cargo is entitled to a record of the transaction. The log gave Jack's mass, his estimated worth as labor, and a disposition code we did not have in our translators. Sunshine found the code in an old Titan lexicon we'd salvaged. The disposition code meant for questioning. After questioning was a second code. The second code meant rendering. That is the word they used, rendering, the way you render fat from a carcass. They were going to ask my brother what he knew about the holdout stations, and then, regardless of what he told them, they were going to take him apart for the protein. I want to tell you we made a plan like soldiers. We did not. We made a plan like a family with a knife to its throat. We sat in the wardroom of the bluff, what was left of us, and Sunshine laid out the route to the West Reach, and the picket lines we would have to cross, and the gun stations, and the nested fleet, and the arithmetic of it. And the arithmetic was simple, and it was final. One battered cruiser against the Armada that held the system. To reach the most heavily defended structure any of us had ever seen, and pull one man out of the heart of it, and somehow come home. The arithmetic said we would die. Every honest number in the room said we would die. And then Scratch put her boots up on the wardroom table, which she knew I hated, and looked around at all of us and said, in that flat voice she used when she had already decided and was only waiting for the rest of the universe to catch up, so we die. We were always going to. Questions just whether we do it on the way to him or sitting here being sensible. And that was the whole of the War Council. That was the entire strategy session. Nobody spoke against it. 60 of us, most of them younger than the dead they'd inherited, and not one voice said the sensible thing, because we had all of us learned the same lesson in the cold years, and it had set in our bones like the wasting set in our parents. Nobody gets left in the dark. We did not take all 60. Jack would have flayed me. We took a skeleton of a skeleton, the ones who could fight or fly or breach, and we left the rest with Sunshine on the deep station with orders to scatter to the cold rocks if we did not come back inside 10 days. I argued with Sunshine for an hour about staying. She won, the way she always won, by pointing out that I was the only one left who could shoot the railgun and navigate at the same time, and that a rescue is not a rescue if the rescuers cannot find the door. So it was the bluff, 3/4 of her a wreck, and a crew you could have fit in a lifeboat, and me on the guns and Scratch on the breach, and a Titan named Sony in the brig. I have not told you about Sony. I should have led with him. He is the reason for half of what worked. We had taken Sony 6 months before, off a wreck. A young Titan barely passed his first molt, abandoned by his own when his patrol ship was crippled in a skirmish with another Titan house, because that is a thing about the Titans I am only now able to make you believe. They will leave their own to die without a backward glance, the moment that one stops being useful to the line. Rank is everything, and the individual is nothing, and a crippled junior with no patron is less than nothing. They had vented him into a lifeboat and logged him as expended and moved on. We found the lifeboat. We were going to leave it. It was Titan. It was the enemy. We had no air to spare for a creature whose people had murdered our parents. Jack opened the lifeboat himself, against every reasonable voice aboard, including mine. He looked at the half-dead alien curled in the failing pod, and he said the only thing he ever said, and we took the creature aboard, and Sunshine kept it breathing, and Jack fed it from our own short rations until it could stand. And the strangest thing happened, the thing none of us had words for and the Titans had words for least of all. Sony did not leave. We offered, once it could be done, we'd have dumped him at a neutral dock, washed our hands. He would not go. He had been left to die by the only kind of belonging his people knew, and a human he had been raised to think of as leavings had reached into the dark and pulled him out for no reason that made sense in his tongue, and something in him broke open that I do not think had a name even for him. He stayed. He learned our speech badly in a voice like gravel in a drum. He taught us things about the Titans we could not have learned in 10 years of war. And when we said we were going to the West Reach for Jack, Sony was at the lock before any of us, his plating gone the dull gray it went when he had decided something, and he said in his terrible scraping voice, the human phrase he had taken for his own and never once said lightly, "Nobody gets left in the dark." A Titan said that, to us, about my brother. I had to turn away so the crew would not see my face. So that was who crossed the line. The bluff, and the leavings, and a defector who had learned the one idea his entire civilization was built to be incapable of having. If you want to know what humanity is, in the end, if you want to know the thing the Titans never understood and never could, it is that. It is that we are the kind of creature that can teach the idea to something that was built without it. Hold on to that too. It is the whole of the matter. We crossed the first picket on the third night out. Sony had taught us how the Titans see, which is to say poorly, in the way that an apex predator who has never been hunted sees poorly. They watched for fleets. They watched for power signatures and formation discipline, and the things a navy does, because they had only ever fought navies. They did not watch for a single dying ship running cold and silent down the gravity well of a dead gas giant, riding the planet's own radiation shadow with her drives flushed to nothing and her crew holding their breath, because no fleet in their experience had ever done a thing so stupid and so small. We slid past their first picket inside the noise of a world, and they logged the radiation spike as weather, because to them, we were not a thing that could be there. The first night past the picket, when Fish had us coasting cold and there was nothing to do but wait for the next bad thing, Scratch came and sat with me at the dark gun station. She did not bring it up gently. Scratch never brought anything up gently. She said, "You didn't fire on the escort when they took him." It was not a question and it was not an accusation. It was just the thing neither of us had said yet laid out flat on the table between us. I told her the truth, which was that the shuttle was inside the kill cone, and Jack was on it, and a faster, harder woman would have fired anyway and trusted the arithmetic. Scratch was quiet a while. Then she said, "A faster, harder woman wouldn't have been worth pulling out of a fire when she was 9. And she put her forehead against the top of my head for a count of 10, and got up and went back to her gear. That was the whole of it. That was Scratch forgiving me for a thing I had not been able to forgive myself. And she did it in 19 words and a count of 10, because that was the only grammar she trusted, and because she knew it was the only grammar I would believe. That is the word the title in your archives will have used if you found this story the way most people find it. Category error. I have heard it. It is a clean, cold phrase, and it is exactly right. A category error is when a thing shows up in a place where, by every rule you have, that kind of thing cannot be. The Titan's entire art of war was a set of categories, fleets, formations, ranks, weights, the arithmetic that had told them children could not crew the ships. And we kept being the thing the categories said could not be there. A children's wreck running an adult's war. A single hull crossing an armada. A defector who loved. Every picket we passed because the Titans were not built to see a thing that should not exist, and we had made ourselves, hull and crew and heart, into exactly that. The second picket nearly ended us. It was a gun platform, a fixed Titan emplacement holding the narrow lane between two rocks, and there was no radiation shadow to ride and no clever way through. There was only the lane and the platform, and 90 seconds of railgun charge against a structure built to kill ships better than ours all day long. Fish flushed everything we had into the drive, and we went down the lane at a speed the bluff was never built to take. The old port engine screaming 0.5% hot, and then a full percent, and then numbers I will not repeat because no one would believe them. And I held the railgun's firing solution on the platform's reactor housing, and I watched the charge crawl and I counted, and the platform woke up and started putting fire down the lane. And the first salvo took our forward salvage armor off in a sheet of light that I felt through the deck like a slap. We lost 4 people in that lane. I am not going to tell you their names because I told you I would not give you a roll of the dead, but I knew all 4, and one of them had been at the air plant in the cold years with Scratch and me, and the section she was in opened to space in under a second when the second salvo found us, and there was no time even to seal it, and we went down the lane with a hole in our flank screaming air into the dark, and 4 of us gone. And at second 89 the charge came green, and I put a railgun slug through that platform's reactor housing at a range where you cannot miss, and a speed where the slug does not so much hit as arrive, and the platform came apart, and we went through the debris of it still screaming, still bleeding air, still alive. Scratch found me at the gun station after when Fish had us coasting and the dead were logged and the hole was sealed with foam and prayer. She did not say anything wise. She put her forehead against the top of my head, the way she had done since we were children, and she stayed there for a count of 10, and then she straightened up and said, "Charge time's still too long," and went back to her breech gear, and that was Scratch telling me she loved me, in the only grammar she had ever trusted. We reached the West Reach on the 6th day. I had seen it on the long lens my whole life. Seeing it close is a different thing. It is one of those structures the mind refuses, at first, to scale. Your eye keeps trying to read it as nearer and smaller than it is, because the true size is an insult. Our old deep dock, the one our parents built, big enough that the Titan fleet nested inside it the way I told you, like wasps in a skull. They had let our yellow work lights die and run the whole thing in their cold blue, so that the structure hung in the dark like a drowned thing lit from inside by something that did not love it. And it was ringed with their ships, the nested fleet, dozens of them, each one alone a match for the bluff and most of them better, arrayed in the lazy, unworried sprawl of a power that has not been seriously challenged in a generation, and does not expect to be. We had one advantage, and it was Sony, and it was small, and it was everything. Sony knew the docking protocols. Not the secret ones, he'd been a junior, expended. He'd never been trusted with anything that mattered but the dull ones, the customs entries, the cargo cycles, the rhythm of a working dock. And he knew the one thing about the Titans that we built the whole approach around, the thing I keep coming back to because it is the key that turned the lock. The Titans do not check on their own assumptions. A people who have decided that the individual is nothing, that rank is everything, that the leavings are leavings, such a people does not build a habit of looking twice. Why would you verify a thing that cannot be otherwise? We came into the West Reach on a stolen West Sider transponder code Sony pulled from the wreck 6 months gone, squawking a routine medical cargo return, the same kind of cold storage medical Jack had died taking, and the dock logged us and slotted us and waved us in, because a battered hull squawking the right code at the right hour in the right lane was, by every category the Titans had, a thing that belonged there. We flew the bluff into the heart of the Armada through the front door, and the front door held it open for us, because we were a category error and the error ran in our favor for once. We had maybe an hour before someone looked twice. Sony walked us in. I mean that the way it sounds, a Titan walking 3 humans through a Titan station, because the one thing more invisible than a leaving is a leaving being escorted by one of the masters, and no junior in that whole drowned moon was going to question a fellow Titan moving cargo on a routine cycle, because to question is to risk being wrong in front of a superior, and a people built on rank fears nothing so much as being wrong in front of a superior. We went through corridors I had only seen in our parents' old schematics. Our own dead dock turned strange and blue and cold, and Sony moved through it with the dull gray plating, and the rolling Titan walk he had not used since we took him aboard. And he did not look back at us once, because a master does not look back at cargo. And I have never in my life trusted anyone the way I trusted that alien straight gray back in those corridors. I knew those corridors. That is the thing I was not ready for. I had grown up on the schematics of the West Reach the way other children grow up on the map of a hometown, because our parents had built it, and our dead had served on it, and every holdout pilot learned its bones in case we ever needed them. And walking through it in the flesh was like walking through the inside of a skull I had only ever seen in diagrams. There, that was the long gallery where the dock crews had taken their meals, our parents among them, and the Titans had stripped the human furniture out and left the great windows. And through the windows, you could see their nested fleet hanging in the blue, dozens of hulls, close enough that I could read the plating marks of rank on the nearest of them. There, that bulkhead still carried a human maker's stamp, an old foundry mark from the inner worlds, half scoured but legible if you knew to look, the last fingerprint of the people who had made this place before the people who had stolen it. I made myself stop reading the stamps. There was no time to grieve a building. We had an hour, and most of it was already spent, and somewhere below us a specialist was about his unhurried work on my brother. Twice we passed Titans in the corridors, and both times my whole body went to water, and both times Sony did the thing he had told us he would do, which was nothing. He did not slow, did not hurry, did not acknowledge, walked his cargo past his fellows with the flat, unbothered carriage of a creature performing a chore beneath comment. The Titans glanced at us and glanced away. We were the right shape in the right place at the right hour, escorted by the right kind of creature, and so we could not be the thing we were, and so we were not seen. The second pair we passed were close enough that I could hear the low resting click of their breathing and smell them. A dry mineral smell like hot stone, the smell of the things that had murdered my mother, and I kept my eyes on Sony's gray back and my hand off my sidearm, and I walked, and they let us by, and I did not breathe again until the corridor bent. They had Jack in the questioning level. Sony got us the location off a dock terminal in passing, reading the disposition logs the way he'd read a customs entry, and his plating went a color I had never seen on him. A deep, ugly red I learned later was the Titan color for shame, because the log said Jack had been moved to rendering. The second code. They had finished asking him things. They were taking him apart. We did not go quiet after that. I have tried to remember the questioning level as a sequence, and I cannot. It comes in pieces. Scratch ahead of me with the breech gear and the heavy sidearm she had carried since the cold years. Sony at a control node, his gray fingers fast in the Titan interface, killing the internal sensors on the level the way you would kill a light, because a master clearing the room of witnesses is a thing no junior questions. A long room of cells, our old crew quarters refitted into something I will not describe, and at the end of it, the rendering bay and the thing in the rendering bay and my brother in the middle of it. There was a Titan working him, a big one plated for the work, and Sony made a sound when he saw it, a low broken click, and gave us its name and rank, which I will render as Todd because the Titan name will mean nothing to you, and because Sony spat the syllables of it like something rotten. Todd was an enforcer, a specialist in rendering. He was good at it. He had been good at it on 100 of us before my brother, and he was unhurried about it, because to a Titan unhurried is a kind of dignity, and he had Jack strapped to the apparatus, and was about his work with the flat focus of a man filing an entry. I want to tell you Jack was defiant. I want to give you the line where my brother spits in the alien's face. He did not. He was past that. He was breathing in the careful, shallow way you breathe when breathing is the only thing left you can do on your own terms, and his eyes found me across the bay. He knew it was me before he could have seen me, the way he always knew, and he did not say nobody gets left in the dark, because he could not get that much air, but he said it with his eyes. He said it the way he'd said everything to me my whole life, and then he closed them. Because he did not want me to watch his face, while I did what we had come to do. Scratch did it, not me. I want that on the record because she would have hated to be left out of it and because it is true. Todd turned at the sound of the bay door, and his great plated head came around with the slow certainty of a thing that has never in its life had reason to hurry. And Scratch did not give a speech and did not hesitate and did not aim for anything fancy. She put the heavy round through the soft seam under the jaw where Sony had taught us a Titan's plate does not cover. And Todd the enforcer, the specialist in rendering, the good worker, went down in our parents' refitted crew quarters and did not get up. And the only thing he said was a single click of pure astonishment, because to the very last he could not believe a leaving had reached him. I cut Jack out of the apparatus while Scratch held the door, and Sony killed the alarms before they finished waking. My brother could not walk. We carried him. He weighed nothing. They had taken so much of him already. He got one hand into my collar, the way Scratch had done in the fire when we were children, and he held on, and he tried to say my name, and I told him to shut up and save his air, and that made him smile, which split his lip, and that is the last time I saw my brother smile, and I have it kept somewhere very deep. We almost made it out clean. That is the worst kind of almost. We had Jack, we had the door, Sony had us a clear lane back to the dock and the bluff, and the whole of the West Reach still did not know we were a thing that could be there. We were 40 meters from the dock lock when the warden found us. Not in person. That is not how the Titans do anything. The warden found us the way he did everything, through the system, a station-wide override that lit every corridor in the cold blue and froze every door, and put his voice on every speaker in a tongue I did not understand, and Sony went stone-still translating in a whisper that shook. The warden had reviewed the rendering bay sensor gap. The warden had, for the first time in a generation, looked twice. And what he had found, what had finally forced the unforceable habit, was a thing his categories could not hold. A leaving had come into the heart of his fortress for a single unit of expended cargo, and had killed his enforcer to take it back. And the arithmetic that had governed his entire war, children cannot crew, individuals are nothing. The leavings are leavings, had a hole punched through it the exact size and shape of my brother, and the warden did not know what to do with a universe in which that was possible, and so he came to look at it himself. He came down to the dock level, the eldest of them. I had built him into a giant in my mind across all the years I had hated him, the one who signed the wasting, and the truth was almost worse. He was not a giant, he was old, his plating gone the dull yellowed gray of many molts, and he moved with a care that I realized with a lurch was pain. The warden of the West Reach was sick. I did not understand it in the moment. I understood it later, and it has never stopped being the coldest thing I know. He stood in the cold blue light at the dock lock between us and the bluff, with no guards, because a warden does not need guards against leavings, and he looked at us, at Jack, broken in our arms, at Scratch with her heavy sidearm, at Sony gone the deep red of shame at the sight of his own eldest, and he asked us a question. Sony translated it in a voice that had stopped shaking and gone very flat. The warden asked, "Why?" Not "Why are you here?" Not "How did you get in?" The warden of the West Reach, the one who had run the arithmetic of a genocide and signed it and watched it work, stood in front of us dying on his feet and asked us, with what I can only call genuine bewilderment, why a thing of no value would be carried out of his fortress at the cost of lives, why the leavings would die for the leavings. It was not a threat. It was not rhetoric. He did not understand. His whole civilization was built around the certainty that the answer to that question was obvious, and the answer was you would not. And we were standing in front of him being the thing his certainty said could not be, and he needed to know why before he killed us, the way a man needs to know the answer to a riddle that has kept him up for a generation. And I will tell you what I learned about the warden in that moment, the thing Sony confirmed for me after, the thing that is the cold center of all of it. The warden was sick because the wasting had not stayed where they put it. The plague they had cooked to kill our adults had done its work, and then, the way a tool turned on the world will, it had begun to change, to learn. The way our own dead engineers used to say every system eventually learns the shape of its container. And the new shape of the wasting had found a door into the Titans. It was killing their eldest now. The warden of the West Reach was rotting from the inside out from the very weapon he had used to murder my mother. And he knew it, and his entire people knew it, and they had no cure and no idea how to make one, because medicine to them was a weapon, and they had never once in their history learned to heal a thing instead of unmake it. They had built a tool of pure unmaking and it had turned, and now the masters were dying the way the leavings had died, and the warden stood in front of us with that horror inside him and could still only ask why we would die for each other. Because even at the end, even rotting, the one idea he could not hold was the one idea that might have saved his species. That you keep the dying alive because they are yours, for no other reason, because nobody gets left in the dark. I shot him. I want to be plain about it because people always want it to have been a duel or a reckoning or some clean thing with a speech in it. It was not. He was an old sick creature blocking a door, and my brother was dying in my arms, and I had the heavy round chambered, and I did not give him an answer to his question because the answer was not for him. The answer was something his whole people had spent their history making themselves unable to receive. And so I did not waste my brother's air on it. I put the round through the seam under his jaw, the same place Scratch had put Todd, the place Sony taught us, and the eldest of the Titans, the warden of the West Reach, the architect of the wasting, went down in the cold blue light of our parents' stolen dock, and the only thing it cost me was a thing I have not gotten back and do not expect to. The dock erupted after that and I lost the shape of it again. We got Jack aboard the Bluff. Fish had her hot and ready against every protocol, the old port engine already screaming. The nested fleet woke up around us, all of it, dozens of hulls, and we ran for the dark with the whole Armada coming alive at our backs, and we should have died there, 40 meters becoming 40,000, the gun stations of the West Reach lighting up one by one. They did not fire. I did not understand it for a long count of seconds. I had us in the lane, full burn, the railgun useless because there were too many of them, and I was waiting for the salvo that would end us, and it did not come, and it did not come, and the gun stations tracked us out of the dock and held their fire and let us go. It was Devon. I learned the name later from Sony, and I will give it to you because it matters. Devon was a Titan. An officer, not high, not low, one of the ones who had stood in the corridors of the West Reach and watched the leavings carry out a thing his categories said could not happen, and watched his dying eldest ask why and get no answer, and something had turned over in him in that moment the way something had turned over in Sony in the lifeboat. When the warden fell, the chain of rank fell with him, because that is how the Titans are made, everything hanging from the eldest. And in the gap before another could seize it, Devon had taken the dock's fire control, and Devon had given the order to hold, and Devon had let us go. He sent us one transmission, on the open channel the Titans used for customs entries, the same flat civic frequency on which they had logged my brother as cargo. Sony translated it. It was not an apology. The Titans do not have the apparatus for an apology any more than they have a word for what Scratch and I were to each other. It was, instead, a question asked the same way the warden had asked his, but turned now in a different direction. Devon asked, "How is it done? How do you keep the dying? Teach us how it is done." We did not answer. Not then. We were running for our lives and Jack was dying in the medbay, and there was no answer you could put in a transmission anyway. But I have thought about Devon's question every day of my life since, and I have come to believe it is the most important thing the Titans ever transmitted, more important than the wasting, more important than the Armada. A people built around the certainty that the individual as nothing had watched the leavings prove the certainty false, and at least one of them had survived the proof, and instead of reaching for a gun he had reached, in the only crippled grammar he had, for the lesson. Teach us how it is done. I think that question is where the Titans began, very slowly, Over years I did not live to see all of, to stop being the thing that signed the wasting. I think Devon, who let us go, who could not say why, planted something in his own ruined people that the warden's whole arithmetic could never have predicted, because it was not in the categories. We lost Sony on the way home. I am going to tell you this part once plainly, and then I am going to stop, because I have never been able to do it more than once at a sitting. The third picket, the one we had ridden the gas giant's shadow to slip past on the way in, was awake and angry on the way out, because the whole system was awake and angry now, the Armada loosed and hunting. There was no shadow to ride and no clever code to squawk and no door to hold open. There was only the lane and a gun platform and the bluff bleeding and slow with her hole and her dead and her screaming port engine, and 90 seconds of railgun charge. We did not have time to wait out, because the platform had us cold and would put us down long before second 89. Sony went out the lock. He took a salvage skiff, one of the little single-seat scrap haulers we used to pick wrecks, with a cutting torch and no weapons and no plan that any of us would have signed, and he ran it at the gun platform while we were still arguing, before any of us could stop him. His plating on the dull, decided gray it went when there was no more discussion to be had. He flew the little unarmed skiff straight into the platform's fire so that the platform would track him instead of us, so that the 90 seconds I needed would belong to the bluff and not to him, and he bought them with the skiff and with himself. And the last thing he transmitted, on our own channel, in his terrible scraping voice, in the human grammar he had taken for his own and made truer than any human I have known, was, "Nobody gets left in the dark." A Titan said that, dying, to buy the lives of the leavings who had taught it to him. I put the railgun slug through the platform at second 89, into the silence Sony had made, and we went home through the wreckage of 2 enemies and one of the best of us, and I have never once in the years since been able to call the Titan simply the enemy, and that ruined clarity is the last and largest thing Sony gave me. Jack lived. I should have said that sooner. He lived. They had taken much of him, and he was a long time getting strong, and he never got all the way back to the man who'd gone out the lock to hold a breach for 30 seconds. But he lived, and he led the holdouts for a long while after, and he was there for the slow, strange years when Devon's transmission turned out to be the first crack in a wall none of us had thought could crack, when the Titans began, ship by ship and house by house, to become something their eldest would not have recognized. Jack saw the beginning of that. I am glad of it. He earned the beginning of it more than anyone alive. We came home one short. That is the arithmetic of it, the only arithmetic that ever mattered to me. We crossed an Armada and pulled a man out of the heart of it and killed the architect of our murder and cracked a regime, and the histories you will have read make it sound like a victory, and I suppose by every number it was. But I do not count it in those numbers. I count it the way a family counts, which the Titans never learned to do. We went out fore-end a skiff over a skeleton crew, and we came home one short, and the one was the Titan who loved us, and there is no column in any victory where you can put that and have it balance. They wrote us off. I said that at the start, and I will end on it, because it is the whole of what I have to teach you, the thing the warden died not understanding, and Devon survived long enough to start to learn. The Titans looked at 100,000 orphaned children on the wrecks of a murdered fleet and ran the arithmetic and wrote us off, because by every category they had, we were leavings, and leavings cannot crew the ships and cannot hold the line and cannot cross an armada and will not die for each other. We were the thing their arithmetic could not hold. We still are. That is not a boast. It is closer to a warning, and I leave it for whoever comes after, human or Titan or whatever else the long dark turns up. Do not run the arithmetic on us. Do not decide what we are and then stop looking. We will be the error in your categories every time. We will come for our own across any distance and through any fleet you put in the way, for no reason your tongue has a word for, and we will not stop, and we will not be sensible about it, and we will not ever leave one of ours in the dark. The port engine still runs a 0.5% hot. I have never let anyone fix it. Some things you learn to trust exactly as they are.